Years ago, I was very pregnant with my second child, and I was lying in bed, having just gotten to sleep after a long night of discomfort, which had kept me up for the better part of the night. It was quiet, and my husband was sleeping soundly next to me, and the dogs were unmoved. But something woke me, and this time it wasn't the sciatica pain or the unholy heaviness of my legs or all of the other things that being incredibly pregnant does to a body. And my body was angry at its lack of rest and for being awoken for some reason that was not apparent to me at the moment. But my mommy senses were definitely tingling. I heaved myself out of bed and into the hallway. I turned my head to see my 3-year-old standing in the rays of the early morning sunlight coming through the bathroom window. She's standing on tiptoe on the step stool at the sink. And then I noticed all the water everywhere. The sink was full and water was spilling over the sides and onto the floor. I ran to the sink and I turned off the water and I looked at my cherub-faced child and said, "Baby, what are you doing?" And she looked at me and said, "I'm gonna go swimming." I stood there confounded, unable to process what I had found myself in. I unclogged the sink because she had stuffed a toy in there, and the water began to drain. And the water on the floor was about 1 centimeter high, maybe more. But the lip at the door, that little thing there that keeps the water in for emergencies like this, it did its job. But if I had waited seconds, it would have spilled over into the carpeted area of our hallway. "Baby," I said, "we can't go swimming in a bathroom. Bathroom isn't made for that." She pouted, disappointed. "It would have been fun." I nodded. It would have been. And I tell this story this morning because our imaginations give us both the best and the worst ideas. And 3-year-olds manage to imagine both the best and the worst ideas at the same time. They have just enough working understanding of the world around them to put into action that which they imagine. It is why 3-year-olds are exhausting. But when you step back and look at the world around us, so much of it came from this beautiful gift of imagination. It is the creative spark of the human spirit. It's how we've built magnificent works of engineering and architecture, buildings that scrape the skies, that evoke awe, rockets that take us to the moon, telescopes that show us the impossible magnitude of space, technology that enables us to talk to each other from across the globe, or even now technology that will do our thinking for us. It's how we've created art and written stories and songs and poems that have confronted us, empowered us, comforted us, given us insight into other people's experiences. It's how we've built systems of government, law, and order programs that benefit the greater good. And while our imaginations have brought about some pretty amazing things, they have also led to some horrific ones, like war, genocide, slavery. It has led to the idea that others are not as human as we are. I mean, it takes a lot of imagination to think of a human as only being worth 3/5 of another human. These horrible things came from the same creative spark of imagination, though rooted in greed, fear, and hunger for power. When we are afraid, our imaginations can run wild, creating monsters that are not there. Much like how a 3-year-old might imagine a monster under their bed, the unknown of the darkness stimulating a response in the mind, creating more fear. These kinds of monsters aren't real, but they can feel real. They give characterization to the fear of the unknown, the fear in the darkness that we cannot see in. Years ago, I served on the board at the UU Church in Reston, and we were going around and asking, and been asked to place an object on our table that represented us and our leadership and our faith, and what would be a little item that would ground us in our work that we did together. And I served with a woman who had brought a little embroidered thing in a frame, and the words said, "Don't believe everything you think." It is a good saying. Our minds have all kinds of thoughts, many of which are based on perception. What we perceive to be true is often so off the mark. Like swimming in a bathroom. Some ideas just don't hold water. Our perceptions can lead our imaginations to some very interesting places, especially in our attempts to understand the world around us. We have attempted to answer big questions like, why are we here? What happens after we die? How did we get here? Was God, God's divinity, still small voice, creative power of the universe? These are a few of the ways we have expressed as a people the hope for understanding these big questions. The way we think about God is really the greatest audacity of our imaginations. And God is the word we have given to explain the unexplainable, based on our limited perceptions and on all that we do not understand. In the darkness under our beds, we have created answers. And some of us have created a God who will judge us, who obliterates our enemies, and will redeem those who believe in him. Some of us see God as one who would become human and give his life in order to save his fallen children from the eternal torments of hell. There are others who see God as a liberator, a chain breaker, and a way finder for the lost, or as one with a special tenderness and hope for the poorest and the oppressed. There are those still who see God as a mother creator, a comforter, and a giver of life. There is the way I think about God, which I have mentioned in this pulpit before, which is as the process or the movement all around us with which we can reach out and take part and participate in this experience of life. More meaning, to make it more meaning and more loving. There are multiple versions of God in the Judeo-Christian traditions alone, multiple visions of this. Meister Eckhart, a 14th century theologian, once preached the words, "I pray God, rid me of God." Elizabeth Johnson, a Catholic theologian and nun, asks, "Why would you want to eliminate God the way you rid your house of termites?" Because, she said, Meister Eckhart thought the narrow, puny notions of G-O-D many people carry around in their imagination are both unworthy of God and damaging to the human spirit. Damaging to the human spirit. Bad theology has caused so much damage throughout history, including justifying slavery, condemning love between consenting adults, and casting women as not much more than meat for men and their children to consume. And as far as we have come, we are still nowhere near shedding these insidiously, maliciously informed ideas which hold people down and elevate the powerful. These things are enraging, just as so much of what is happening in our public sphere is enraging, heartbreaking and enraging. Luckily, the Hebrew Bible is familiar with rage, and there is much wisdom there. There is also plenty to rethink in the Hebrew Bible, and if you would like a feminist perspective, I highly recommend Standing Again at Sinai by Judith Plaskow, where she imagines women were present during the writing of the Torah and whose perspectives were incorporated and not just written about as peripheral characters in men's lives. But the Hebrew Bible is full of imagination. There's apocalyptic literature in the book of Daniel, the wisdom literature made up of the book of Job and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. It's bursting with allegory and metaphors to help a struggling people deal with their difficulties in life. The Psalms and the book of Lamentations are ripe with revenge fantasies of a wronged and angry people. And the prophets are defined by the use of their imaginations to call their communities into God and covenant and call out the injustices that they witnessed in their time and demand better from their people for a brighter future. The Hebrew Bible is written from the perspective of an oppressed people and people who know rage and injustice. And it is full of what Walter Brueggemann, a prolific writer and biblical scholar, calls the royal consciousness, which is the pervading worldview of the dominance of those in power, who through politics and economic affluence not only align themselves with God, but are empowered by a God who legitimizes them and what they do. The patriarchy, colonization, consumerism, which maybe we might really want to call capitalism, and white supremacy are all markers of today's royal consciousness. The dominant powers that pervade our everyday lives in discrete, constant, unassuming ways, along with in-your-face, freedom-taking practices like regulating women's bodies and criminalizing Black and brown people. Though Brueggemann might say Christian nationalism is more precisely our current expression of royal consciousness because he relates it so deeply to God being used as a way to uphold this dominance, power, and affluence. Prophetic imagination is the counter to this royal consciousness, and it has endured through millennia of those unwilling to let the horrors around us caused by fellow humans stand. Prophetic imagination calls on our passions, our grief, our rage, and our knowledge of justice, and not blind justice of the courts, but knowing what is right and what is wrong, based on a deep connection to these passions and emotions that we feel. Prophetic imagination is the call out of deep injustice based on experiences of anguish in hope for a better future, hope that we can do this better. And I wonder, as a people of faith who hold a variety of theologies, who come together to cultivate good for goodness' sake, if we might be able to imagine a power that exists in the darkness the unknown that isn't a monster, isn't vengeful, isn't born out of greed or created out of fear, but is a power instead that moves us in a loving direction. A power that speaks to and works in partnership with the loving divine power within each of us. A loving direction that grounds us in what we know is right and what is wrong, and gives us the fortitude to wrestle with the blurry areas and the muddy waters in which we find ourselves. A loving movement in which we can exercise our prophetic imaginations to call out the wrongs and work toward a healed and whole expression of beloved community. Because in a universe where imagination leads to so much, my greatest hope is that we can imagine a more loving way. Thank you.